the EU and the EU's role in international efforts to maintain peace and security is occurring in a very special context. We can see that by the start of 2025, the EU's degradation from an economic project intended to prevent a new war in Europe by fostering cooperation between former opponents and enemies, its degradation into a political project, doing everything to sow enmity on our continent and to provoke such enmity and war, has come to an end. It's complete, in fact, this degradation. This sensible club aimed at integration, which used to promote cooperation with Russia, has today definitively turned into a fossilized, aggressive, Russophobic bloc, which has staked its energy, economic, social, and financial well-being on a pointless confrontation with its eastern neighbor. Today, more than ever, it's clear that the EU is precipitously losing in this confrontation. Today, we can clearly point out all of the key miscalculations of the EU's capital, Brussels, which resulted in this dire situation for the EU. In particular, I'd like to point out the enlargement of 2004, when, for political reasons, membership was extended to some states which hadn't fully aligned themselves with the criteria for membership which were established by the EU itself. As a consequence, the EU, the Poles, Baltic states, and a few other newly minted Europeans suffering from an acute sense of historical revanchism entered the EU with their Russophobic bats in the belfry. After 20 years, we can regrettably note that these bats have multiplied, taking up residence in the minds of those who not only suffered from Russophobia for decades, but had in fact previously advocated for mutually beneficial cooperation with Russia. This process was gradual, yet the negative changes have become more and more noticeable. In 2008, thus, the Eastern Partnership Policy was formulated, aiming at cutting mutually beneficial ties between Russia and its neighbors and reorienting these ties towards the EU. The main victim of this was the Ukraine, where the West has consistently implemented its anti-Russia project, cultivating and promoting contempt for everything that's Russian, which is portrayed as being dangerous for the future of the aforementioned state, Ukraine. Unprofitable economic deals were imposed on the Ukrainian elite, requiring it to break up the common economic space it shared with Russia and requiring it also to eschew any kind of good neighborly relations with Russia as well. 6 years on, these efforts reached fever pitch. In 2014, there was an anti-constitutional coup d'etat in Kiev. The directors and producers of this coup d'etat were 3 EU countries, France, Germany, and Poland. They didn't keep the promises and guarantees they gave to the former Ukrainian president, Mr. Yanukovych. They didn't insist on the implementation of the agreements concluded with the EU's help by the new radical opposition. What happened next, we all know full well. The nationalists that acceded to power waged genuine war to destroy civilians, Russian speakers in the Donbass, thereby causing an intra-Ukrainian armed conflict. It could have been stopped thanks to the Minsk agreements signed with the mediation of 2 EU members, Germany and France. However, as we know from the avowals of the former leaders of the aforementioned states, the regime in Kiev had no intention of implementing the Minsk Accords, whereas Berlin and Paris, instead of pressuring Kiev to do so, used the Minsk process exclusively as a smokescreen so as to arm Ukraine and to prepare it for war with Russia. And since the slaughter of the Russian-speaking population, which claimed the lives of over 10,000 people, not only did not end, but by February 2022 had significantly intensified, we were compelled to begin the special military operation. After that, the EU's Russophobia went through the roof. The EU refused cheap Russian energy based on the principle, cut off your nose to spite your face. Swallowing without protest the blowing up of Nord Stream, those pipelines, and pulling its own economy into a deep crisis, imposing sanctions on Russia, which it ended up harming itself in doing. The EU began banning Russian culture, calling Russian artists Ukrainian artists, making every effort to fund the war in Ukraine in the vain hope that the Zelensky regime will manage to inflict military defeat on Russia. When the new US president proclaimed a new course towards a peaceful settlement of the Ukrainian crisis, the EU became an apologist for war, definitively completing its degradation. It's now doing everything it can to thwart the US-Russian dialogue on Ukraine. We need to look no further than the recent pronouncements by the Danish PM, Ms. Mette Frederiksen, and here I quote, "Peace in Ukraine is more dangerous than ongoing war." No need to comment on that. Madam President, some countries are today upset that we're not engaging in dialogue with Europe. Russia hasn't engaged in dialogue with the EU not because we suspended such dialogue, but simply because the EU itself did this. There are no longer any interlocutors of sound mind left for us to speak to. Today's meeting illustrates this well, because the briefer was the new High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, a genuine Russophobe, Ms. Kaja Kallas. She's well known in Russia. We recall what she said back when she was the Prime Minister of Estonia. And here I quote, "Russia's defeat is not such a bad thing. And it's not such a bad thing if a big power is made smaller." End of quote. In her new role, Ms. Kallas, fantasizing about the strongest army in Europe, which is how Ms. Kallas describes the Ukrainian army, fantasizing about its entry into NATO, she had the temerity to assert that Russian citizens are not dying in the conflict, demonstrating at the same time the flag of the Ukrainian Armed Forces Marine Brigade, responsible for countless crimes and killings in the Kursk region, and these against civilians. How can Russians respond to such outrageous assertions if in the last year alone the number of casualties, civilian casualties on Russian territory amounted to 5,500, of which 809 people were killed. 347 children were amongst the casualties and 51 children died. At the start of this year, after Russophobia, a settlement in the Kursk region was liberated, in the cellars of residential buildings, we found Ukrainian armed forces torture chambers. The bodies of 7 locals were found there. They were mainly elderly persons. They had been tortured to death by the Ukrainian Nazis. This is not a staged scene like Bucha, where the Kiev princeling takes Western guests on guided tours. These are actual crimes. We've drawn the attention of the Security Council on countless occasions and done the same in other international fora. Just a few days ago, in that same village, more bodies were found. They died in a similar fashion, and probably in the next few days, this lamentable list will only get longer because Ukrainian armed forces are now suffering massive losses, fleeing frantically from the Kursk region. We've now liberated territory that stretches across tens of square kilometers. Just today, the largest attack by Ukrainian drones on Russian territory was waged, and this includes Moscow and the region around it. 337 drones have been struck down. 91 were above Moscow. People died and there were casualties. This is surprising, given that the Secretary General of the OSCE was visiting Moscow on that same day. The Kiev regime seems to want to demonstrate to the Secretary General its true terrorist colors. Ukrainian drones were directed at civilian sites. We've underscored this on many occasions. The Russian armed forces are striking on military infrastructure and infrastructure tied to the Ukrainian military-industrial complex. We do not target residential areas or social infrastructure, in contrast to the deliberate Ukrainian attacks on civilian sites in Russia. Colleagues, how do you see our discussions with such characters who have been bitterly hating Russia for years now? Even before her high European appointment, Ms. Kallas directly participated in a years-long campaign in Estonia aimed at squeezing out the Russian language from Estonia, which remains the mother tongue for a noteworthy section of the Estonian population. As a result, roughly 5% of Estonians are stateless, although they're going to do away with this status in the near future. Almost all educational opportunities in Russian have been eliminated. An active fight is being waged on dissent by the Estonian Orthodox Church and on the Estonian Orthodox Church. Nazis are strolling the streets and monuments to Hitler's accomplices are being erected. In a word, when she goes to Ukraine or speaks to the Zelensky regime, Ms. Kallas seems to be in an ideologically friendly environment. She's bothered by the rights of the Russian-speaking population, tens of thousands of political prisoners, a lack of political freedoms, draconian censorship, and prosecution of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. She's not bothered because she's seen this all of this before at home in Estonia, and that's why she truly believes that the violations of the rights of Russians, the killing of Russians, is normal. Can you fathom even a hypothetical dialogue between Russia and the EU when the EU is represented by politicians with these convictions? The EU, which can bar a frontrunner from running in presidential elections without putting forward any convincing accusations. This is what happened in Romania. Colleagues, by way of conclusion, in light of the above, I'd like to call on you to think long and hard about whether the UN needs to engage in dialogue with such a body which itself flagrantly violates human rights, but is strongly associated the world over with the aggressive imposition of neoliberal approaches and with the pontificating on human rights, combining this with neocolonial approaches, cultivating pocket dictatorships, and imposing harsh sanctions on anyone who disagrees with it. This approach does not and cannot bear any relation with the UN's efforts and with the principles governing the UN's cooperation with regional organizations, as per Chapter 8 of the Charter. It comes as no surprise that countries of the Global South, instead of aligning themselves with the European so-called rules, are increasingly opting for non-coercive groupings on an equal footing, for instance, BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. As for the Russian Federation, we stand ready to partake in a mutually respectful dialogue with those European countries which aren't guided by the paradigms of the Kallas's and von der Leyens of this world. That is, those who are pursuing above all their national priorities and the needs to establish on the European continent sustainable and long-term peace based on the respect of the positions and interests of all states, including Russia. The more we have, the more states we have in Europe who don't share the Russophobic convictions of Ms. Kallas and her ilk, the better the chances of peaceful, progressive development on our common continent. I thank you.
The statement and comments made by the representative of the Russian Federation. I'd like to remind all members that this is a place of respect and decorum. We're here to discuss this cooperation between the United Nations and European Union. Council members are therefore reminded to refrain from comments of a personal or disrespectful nature. I give the floor now to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you, High Representative Kaja Kallas, for your briefing and participation in today's meeting. For the United Nations to accomplish its primary mission of promoting peace and stability, close cooperation between the UN and regional and sub-regional organizations to uphold the principles of the UN Charter is essential. The United States is closely linked to Europe through shared values and common history. Our national story and our form of government have their origin in the political philosophy that originated on the European continent. From that shared heritage, we derive our commitment to democracy, freedom of expression, the rule of law, religious freedom, respect for individual rights and liberties, and economic opportunity. The United States stands firmly behind these universal principles. The EU plays an important role in international peace and security, both in Europe and beyond. The EU and the United Nations should cooperate to meet the challenge of preserving peace. For example, in the Western Balkans, EU4's Operation Althea supports the sovereignty, territorial integrity, and security of a multi-ethnic Bosnia and Herzegovina as authorized by this Council. Given persistent threats to Bosnia and Herzegovina's territorial integrity, we continue to look to EU leadership to ensure EU4 Althea is fully resourced to continue carrying out its mandate. We also welcome the EU's support for regional peace and security through its rule of law mission in Kosovo and the efforts to advance Serbia's and Kosovo's normalization for regional stability. The EU contributes to implementing the UN arms embargo on Libya through Operation Irini, in accordance with Security Council Resolution 2292 and subsequent resolutions. This important mission is essential to ensuring that decisions of this Council are effectively carried out. Madam President, terrorism in all its forms and manifestations constitutes one of the most serious threats to international peace and security. The United States appreciates its partnership with the EU on counterterrorism efforts, including in encouraging effectiveness and results in the UN counterterrorism architecture. President, as we sit here today, Europe's greatest security challenge is the Russia-Ukraine war. 15 days ago, this Council adopted a landmark resolution put forward by the United States calling for an end to the war. The United States, as President Trump has made clear, is committed to ending the war and achieving a durable peace. We are counting on Europe and the European Union to help facilitate and to help underwrite that peace. Once a durable peace has been achieved, it will be more urgent than ever for the EU and its member states, in this forum and others, to play a key role in providing security guarantees. Europe must be strong, resilient, self-sufficient, to ensure not just peace and security in Europe, but to be a true partner in ensuring international peace and security. We recognize the role that the important role of European countries in welcoming millions of Ukrainian refugees and leading contributions they will make to Ukraine's post-war reconstruction and security. President, regional organizations that uphold the principles of the UN Charter can be a valuable resource for the UN, a force multiplier that can magnify the impact of UN resources and achieve better outcomes. We encourage all Council members to continue to renew authorizations for the EU's important work, including EU4 Althea and Operation Irini. We encourage the EU to continue working closely with the United Nations, and particularly the Security Council, to promote peace and security for the European region and beyond. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United States for their statement, and now give the floor to the representative of China.
Thank you, President. I welcome the presence of Ms. Kallas, EU High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, and thank her for her briefing. Every year, the Security Council holds a dialogue on cooperation between the UN and the EU, in which China has always actively participated. At a time when the international security landscape is undergoing profound changes and facing many daunting challenges, the convening of today's open session is of particular relevance. China always believes that the EU is an important pole in a multipolar world. To maintain the stability of the international system and to resolve major global issues, the EU's participation and leadership are indispensable. China is pleased to see cooperation between the UN and the EU and to see the EU playing an important role in UN affairs. First, we welcome the EU's efforts to uphold and defend the purposes and principles of the UN Charter. This means that the spirit of the Charter should be interpreted and implemented in a complete and accurate manner without selective application or double standards. It means strict compliance with international law and the universally recognized basic norms of international relations, rather than the ambiguous so-called rules-based international order. Second, we hope that EU will leverage the UN platform to actively engage in international cooperation and find solutions to global challenges. We hope the EU will be committed to working with all parties, in particular countries of the Global South, to promote reforms and improvements in global governance, thereby making shared progress under the banner of multilateralism. The principles of sovereign equality and non-interference in internal affairs should be upheld. The social systems and development path independently chosen by all countries should be respected, any attempts to polarize or provoke confrontation should be guarded against. And unilateralism and power politics should be jointly resisted. Third, we expect the EU to support the financial basis of the UN with concrete actions. As the most economically developed group of countries with the highest per capita income, the EU should make a commensurate financial contribution to the UN. At a time when the UN is facing a liquidity crisis, we welcome the commitment that Ms. Kallas has just made to the UN finances. We hope the EU will continue to increase its humanitarian and development assistance to support the work of the UN and its subsidiary bodies. And meanwhile, utilize its own resources to help developing countries accelerate the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. President, after over 3 years of delay, the Ukrainian crisis has finally come to the moment of a negotiated settlement. There can be no winners in conflict and no losers in peace. Negotiation is the end of conflict and the beginning of peace. Despite the difference in positions, all parties share the desire to reach a fair, lasting, and binding peace agreement that is acceptable to all parties. This is a commendable consensus and a goal that should be jointly pursued. China welcomes and supports all efforts dedicated to peace, while we expect all parties and stakeholders to participate in the peace talks. As the war takes place on its soil, Europe should play its role to promote peace, jointly tackle the root causes of the crisis, and build a balanced, effective, and sustainable European security framework. Without peace in the Middle East, the world will not be stable. The question of Palestine has always been at the heart of the Middle East issue. The crux of the cycle of Palestinian-Israeli conflict lies in the fact that the two-state solution is only half realized, with Israel having established a state long ago while a Palestinian state remains elusive. China commends the efforts of the EU and others to promote the implementation of the two-state solution and welcomes the EU's positive response to the Gaza reconstruction plan adopted at the emergency summit of the Arab League. We expect the EU to continue its constructive role in supporting the reconstruction of Gaza and in alleviating the humanitarian disaster. President, this year marks the 50th anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic relations between China and the EU. China highly values its relationship with the EU and supports European integration and the EU's strategic autonomy. We have confidence in the EU and hope that it will become a reliable partner for China. China is ready to work with the EU and its member states to deepen cooperation in the UN and other multilateral fora, to practice true multilateralism, and to jointly contribute to the maintenance of world peace, stability, and prosperity. Thank you, President.
I thank the representative of China for their statement, and I give the floor now to the representative of Pakistan.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I would begin by welcoming the EU's High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, Ms. Kaja Kallas, to the Security Council. I also thank her for her important briefing to the Council this morning. Madam President, the world around us is undergoing monumental changes. Challenges of peace, security, development, climate, terrorism, and the global instability and geopolitical confrontation. The increasing geopolitical rivalries, rising security dilemmas, geo-economic competition, and continued environmental degradation. These are rapidly transforming the environment in which the Security Council and member states operated previously. It is beyond doubt that these changes have and will continue to have far-reaching and intergenerational consequences that no country and no nation can escape, but neither can confront on its own. These developments have and will add to the complexity, uncertainty, and unpredictability of the world we face today. We have heard with attention the views expressed by Ms. Kallas on the major conflicts around the world. We hope for early peace in Ukraine through ongoing dialogue and inclusive processes. We welcome the EU's humanitarian support to the suffering people of Gaza and the West Bank, and its support to UNRWA. We also welcome the EU's support to the Arab and now the OIC plan for reconstruction of Gaza and peace in Palestine based on the two-state solution. Madam President, all conflicts and disputes must be resolved in accordance with the principles of the UN Charter, applied universally and consistently. Madam President, we welcome the EU's continued support to the UN's annual budget, including through voluntary contributions and the provision of necessary funding for the UN agencies and programs, and the European Union's continued commitment to the UN peacekeeping operations and peace-building activities. As a developing country, Pakistan also appreciates the EU's commitment to the Paris Climate Agreement, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, the reform of the international financial architecture, a provision of humanitarian assistance for people afflicted by catastrophes. And at a time when international development cooperation is under immense stress, the EU's sustained support, including to UN agencies, funds and programs, will be critical. We look forward to collaborating with the EU to secure a meaningful result at the 4th International Conference on Financing for Development in Spain. Madam President, Pakistan and the European Union enjoy a robust, comprehensive and wide-ranging partnership. The EU, as a unit, is Pakistan's largest trade and investment partner. The GSP Plus regime has played an important role in the growth of Pakistan-EU trade and has served as a win-win model for economic cooperation. We welcome the Pakistan-EU Strategic Engagement Plan signed in 2019 with structural dialogues, including the EU-Pakistan Political Dialogue and the Pakistan-EU Joint Commission meetings. We welcome EU investments. We would welcome EU investments under the Global Gateway Strategy in renewable energy, digital infrastructure, education, water, sanitation, and disaster management, and hope to explore opportunities through the Horizon Europe program. To conclude, Madam President, we must all together reaffirm our commitment to international law, equality, and a global order underpinned by the UN Charter to promote durable peace, sustainable development, and inclusive growth. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of Pakistan for their statement, and I give the floor now to the representative of Somalia.
Thank you, Madam President. At the outset, I would like to thank Her Excellency, Ms. Kaja Kallas, European Union High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, and Vice President of the European Commission for her briefing. Somalia recognizes the increasingly critical role that regional organizations play in the global security architecture, as guided under Chapter 8 of the Charter of United Nations. The complex challenge we face in the international peace and security are varied and multidimensional and interconnected, continuing to undermine political stability and socioeconomic development. We strongly believe that regional and sub-regional organizations are indispensable institutions in combating contemporary challenges to peace and security. The complementarity between the United Nations and regional arrangements strengthens our collective ability to address conflict situations and respond to emerging transnational threats such as terrorism and organized crime. Madam President, my delegation commends the EU's commitment to multilateralism, the only viable path towards a rules-based international order. Additionally, my delegation appreciates the EU's consistent focus on peace building and their anticipated leadership in launching a group of friends on peace building co-chaired with the African Union. The partnership between African Union and the European Union marks a significant milestone in 2025, celebrating 25 years of sustained diplomatic cooperation. This distinguished relationship was formally established during the groundbreaking Africa-EU Summit in Cairo in the year 2000, setting the foundation for decades of meaningful dialogue and collaboration. The recent adoption of EU-African Union Partnership Performance Acceleration Program demonstrates both unions' steadfast commitment to the strengthening their diplomatic ties. This strategic initiative harmoniously aligns with the aspirations outlined in the Agenda 2063, the African Union's comprehensive framework for continental transformation while silencing the guns. In that regard, my delegation commends the adoption in December of 2023 of the Resolution 2719, which opened the door for the UN funding for African Union-led peace operations authorized by the Security Council. The technical and financial support of the EU to these AU-led missions and implementations of that milestone resolution will be of critical importance for the African continent's peace and security landscape. Madam President, we believe that the continued partnership between the UN and the EU should be reinforced in several critical ways. First, enhanced support for African-led peace support operations and ongoing discussions on the use of United Nations assessed contributions for operations authorized by the Security Council. Second, prioritize prevention and peace building through investing in initiatives that address the root causes of the conflicts, including sustainable development and economic empowerment. In this regard, we welcome EU's new consensus on the roles of the development cooperation, which has strengthened the nexus between security and development in a way that we hope will continue to have transformative impact on the fragile situations. In conclusion, Madam President, we reiterate that the United Nations and the international community must make active use of efforts by regional and sub-regional organizations. The principles of national ownership and priority for regional leadership should remain the guiding pillars in our collective response to maintaining international peace and security. Somalia remains committed to working with the UN the AU and the EU in pursuit of sustainable peace, security, and development, not only in the Horn of Africa, but across the entire continent and beyond. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Somalia for their statement, and I shall now make a statement in my capacity as representative of Denmark. High Representative Kallas, thank you for your briefing. 80 years ago, our forebears committed to saving succeeding generations from the scourge of war. They did so with the recognition that peace and security is a collective endeavor, that it requires global and regional cooperation. That is why they dedicated a whole chapter of the United Nations Charter to the crucial role of regional organizations in the maintenance of peace and security. Today, that role remains as vital as ever, as Europe faces the greatest threat to its security in decades. Colleagues, against this backdrop, Denmark warmly welcomes today's meeting on the cooperation between the United Nations and the European Union. Denmark is firmly committed to both organizations. We have worked for and supported the long-standing and growing partnership between them, and will continue to do so. Colleagues, as we've heard this meeting, a firm belief in multilateralism and a strong dedication to international law are the cornerstone of the EU's actions. Quite frankly, this is our DNA. It is what makes the European Union such a strong and natural partner for the United Nations across all three pillars: peace and security, sustainable development, and human rights. High Representative Kallas has provided us with an excellent overview of the many ways in which the EU supports, both financially and politically, the United Nations. From financing development and the 2030 Agenda, to reforms of the UN development system and a reinvigorated resident coordinator system, the UN can count on the EU and its member states as the world's largest provider of official development assistance. Allow me to highlight two areas where Denmark sees potential for even stronger and more strategic EU-UN cooperation. Firstly, crisis management. Both the United Nations and the European Union are committed to working in an integrated, coherent, and inclusive manner to advance sustainable peace and prevent conflict. As violent conflict become increasingly complex, the need for closer cooperation and continuous dialogue between the EU and the UN become even more necessary. This is particularly evident where EU missions are deployed alongside UN-led or UN-supported missions in several countries, including Somalia, Libya, and the Central African Republic. Secondly, upholding international law. The European Union is founded on an international order based on the UN Charter and international law. So much so that respect for these principles is written into our treaty on the European Union. Today, even those most fundamental principles are under attack. Principles of sovereignty, territorial integrity, and independence. Denmark welcomes and is proud to be part of the EU's unwavering support for these principles. Principles that underpin the EU's steadfast support for Ukraine in the face of Russia's illegal war of aggression and blatant disregard for international law. Principles that underline the need for a comprehensive, just, and lasting peace in Ukraine, which are key to upholding a world order in which might does not make right. In closing, we believe that this Council should welcome, encourage, and build upon this cooperation. We should utilize the EU's value added wherever we can. We should be ambitious in taking this EU-UN partnership for peace and security to the next level. As a proud member of both organizations, Denmark is firmly committed to this partnership. You can count on our unwavering support. Thank you. I resume my function as President of the Council. The representative of the Russian Federation has asked for the floor to make a further statement. No. Okay. I now give the floor to Her Excellency, Ms. Kaja Kallas, to respond to some comments and questions I raised.
Thank you, Your Excellencies, for this very, very interesting debate. So I have few comments. First on multilateralism. United Nations was established after the Second World War so that there wouldn't be any wars anymore. So the United Nations Charter is a really good document based on the universal principles of sovereignty, territorial integrity, everything that really protects countries. Like we had the president who said that international law is really a nuclear weapon for small states. And like Paul Henry Sparks said, there are only two types of states in the world, the small states and those countries who haven't realized that they are small states. So I think it's in our interest, everybody's interest, that the international law is really followed. Like many stressed here, these are also fundamental principles of the European Union. European Union is also a peace project. As we still have wars in the world, so we need to ask why is it so, and what is the international law really lacking? And I think one of the elements is accountability. The United Nations Charter is a very good document with very good principles, but what happens if somebody really breaches those principles? There has to be accountability in order to prevent wars in the future. European Union is a good project, and as enlargement was mentioned, I'm very happy to say that there are many countries who want to join European Union. So this is a good organization and a good example of multilateral cooperation. And of course, we know that multilateralism is not always easy. We have 27 countries in European Union. We need to reach decisions, and that also applies to United Nations. But I think it's important that we do. So some mentioned the nuclear proliferation. I think, again, the international law is extremely important and the following of the UN Charter, because if this is not the umbrella that protects all the countries, then all the countries who are afraid of their neighbors will want to have a nuclear weapon, because this is the only tool that protects them from the attacks of their neighbor countries. And all the countries who have an appetite for their neighbors' territories will want to have a nuclear weapon, because this is, threatening with nuclear weapon gets them what they want. And I think we don't want to live in such a world. Maritime safety, what was pointed out by Panama, I think this is a very, very important point. I think we need to develop the international law further when it comes to maritime safety, because the world has changed. In the maritime area, we have now cables on the sea, so we have new risks also, and these risks can have a lot, very, very big impact. So I'm really looking forward to cooperating also with you in terms of developing these international laws even further. It's a very important point. Then on Gaza, we had just Association Council, European Union with Israel, also pointing out those issues that were raised today. We also will have a high-level political dialogue with Palestine, and like I said in my intervention, we are supporting the two-state solution, and really in order to have the two states, we need to really have also support the Palestinians and Palestinian state, so that there would be more equal share there. And I think here it's extremely important that we will work together with the regional actors as well as the international actors to really achieve this, because this is for the stability and peace in the Middle East. And now, listening to the Russian representative, I must say that I once again reiterate how much we need to fight with the misinformation and do it all together, because it was a good illustration of really rewriting history and presenting all these lies. And of course, I don't have time to, overturn them all here, but I think it's important that we work together in fight of misinformation, because this is important. Phobia is fear. If you take phobia is fear, then the question is, why are countries afraid of Russia? And if you look at the list that Russia has attacked, you take the 40s, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, you take the 2000s, Georgia, Chechnya, Syria, Crimea, Donbas, Ukraine, none of these countries have ever attacked Russia. So it is clear that the countries who are neighboring Russia are afraid of Russia because they are continuing to attack this. So these fears are not ungrounded. And therefore, I think it's extremely important that we uphold the UN Charter, which says that you have to respect the territorial integrity, sovereignty of another country, because this is the only thing that protects all of these countries. On peace. Of course, everybody wants peace, and I don't know anybody more than the Ukrainians who want peace. Because they are constantly bombarded in Ukraine. And also Europe is a peace project, so we really want peace. But we also want this peace to last, and we also want the human suffering to end. We have the examples where, even if there is peace, it doesn't mean that the human suffering will stop if it is occupied territories. After the Second World War, there was peace, but it was mass deportation of people, it was suppressing of language and culture. All these things are depriving of the people and the states of the right to exist and a right to exist as an independent countries. And therefore, we are working for the peace to last. We are working for the human suffering to stop, whether it comes to Ukraine or whether it comes to Gaza or the conflicts we have in Africa. I think this is what we need to work for. And as a conclusion, I think I believe that despite all these problems, a fair and functioning multilateral system is the only way to peaceful, just, and sustainable world. And as I was stressing in my intervention, European Union is willing to do its share, and we are willing to work with all the countries who respect the United Nations Charter and all the principles and values in the UN Charter. So thank you once again for this very, very interesting exchange. Thank you.
I thank Her Excellency Ms. Kallas for the clarification she has provided. The representative of the Russian Federation has asked the floor to make a further statement.
Thank you, Madam President. I wasn't going to take the floor, although I could have taken the floor on a point of procedure, a point of order, because I don't recall anyone asking questions of Ms. Kallas which she has to answer. Second, you, as President of the Security Council, know full well, and if you don't, let me remind you, that a briefing in the Security Council is not supposed to be an interactive dialogue with the briefer. I don't recall this happening since I've been here, but what I do recall is that your European colleagues, EU members, did try to interrupt briefers to which questions had been put, briefers who wanted to answer those questions but didn't get the opportunity to do so because they were interrupted. In fact, Security Council meetings, open Security Council meetings, are not supposed to be a dialogue with the briefer. The briefer is supposed to deliver the briefing, we hear what we hear, and then if someone disagrees, if the briefer disagrees with what delegations said, well then the briefer can turn to the media and outline their views there. But I don't actually want to engage in controversy with Ms. Kallas. I said everything I wanted to say in my statement. I wanted to say to you, Ms. President, that you leveled some accusations at us, but let me remind you that Ms. Kallas is here representing the European Union. And when we mentioned the EU, we weren't speaking about her specifically, her personally, but as a representative of the European Union, quoting what she said from the horse's mouth, so to speak. So you saying that our remarks were inappropriate, well, we deemed that inappropriate. I thank you.
The representative of the Russian Federation for this statement. The representative of France has asked for the floor to make a further statement. I give them the floor.
Oui, merci beaucoup.
Thank you. I must respond here to indicate that we have had a highly useful debate to shed light on all areas of cooperation between the UN and the EU. Almost all, most likely all, except one member state, said basically the same thing. We've heard a lot of useful things from non-European member states regarding this cooperation. So we've had a very fruitful debate in that sense. I think that the ad hominem attacks that we've seen are not in line with the Security Council's working methods and can but be condemned. Acrimonious remarks, false accusations should not be further publicized in this platform. Thank you.
Representative of France for their statement. There are no more names inscribed in the list of speakers. The meeting is adjourned.